Okay, hi everyone. Thanks very much, Marion. And behind the scenes, other than Marion, I also have Grace, who's going to be helping me with the slides. So welcome also to those of you who were here for the last session that I ran on the 15th of April. If you weren't here for that, don't worry, because we will kind of do a little bit of a recap. And obviously, we still have lots of information to kind of link in to the full change pathway. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Grace. Just to emphasize, these are the areas that we're going to focus on today. Now, at the bottom of your screen, you have both the chat function and the Q&A function. What I'd like us to do, this is going to be quite an interactive session, as much as it can be in a virtual environment. So I will want lots of chat during this session. So if you wouldn't mind now, just clicking on the chat button, which is at the bottom of your screen to the just slightly to the left. And if you can just say hello to me, just so that I know that you're there. So I'd like to see lots of hello highs. Oh, brilliant. So lots of hello highs coming through. So it is working. So that means that, you know, when I pose any questions, I expect to get some responses. I was just saying to my colleagues, a few seconds in a virtual world seems like forever. So if I pose any questions, please don't keep me hanging. Just let's keep the momentum going. So we're focusing on the story so far, and then what we want to be after COVID-19 and where we want to get to as a procurement function. Grace, next slide, please. So this slide, so those of you who were with me on the 15th might recognize this. What I try to do then is to emphasize the fact that the traditional change pathway, where clearly you, either as a leadership team or with your team members, you've made a clear decision to move from your current state to a future state, and you go through all of the planning that goes with that, to where we have now a COVID-19 pathway, which is where we were happy with where we were. We didn't want to move, but hey, we've now shifted into the red, into the crisis zone, and we focused a lot on that at the last session. But today, what we really want to do is move ourselves gradually to start thinking and planning for that transition side of things. So you can clearly see that red circle there. If that's where we're going to focus on today. And before I continue, one thing I did forget to mention after asking you to say hi to me, on the right-hand side at the bottom of your screen, you have the Q&A function. So if you have any specific questions that come up as I'm speaking that don't quite fit into the narrative at the time, please feed them into the Q&A function. So the chat is for us to engage with each other, and the Q&A function is for you to pose any questions, which we'll look at in the last 20 minutes of this session. So next slide, please, Grace. Okay, so what we have here, what I've tried to do here is build a little bit of a case study. And what I'm going to ask us here is just to look at what I've written around the little office environment we have here. This is where I would say we were before COVID-19. And what I'd just like to find out is how close this case study is, or at least was, to your reality before COVID-19. So let's start at 6 o'clock, IT systems, bottom middle of that slide. Rigid, complicated systems that only solve, a few problems in relation to procurement, systems probably that don't give us a single source of information, that kind of thing, those kind of IT systems. Does that chime with what we have in the function at the moment, or are you way beyond that? Because I just want to see how close to reality this case study might be. Close, yeah, okay, so either partially or fully or not at all, just let me know. So people are saying, yeah, a little bit close to. So IT systems, yeah, very close, good, pretty accurate, I'm happy about that. Now, what about, so just moving on to slightly to 7 o'clock, business processes. I would say here, this is a case study where you have an office environment where the business processes are, lots of repetitive tasks, probably numerous manual tasks as well. Don't know how much that chimes with what people have in their office environments at the moment. Any Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, so lots of that happening. And then we go up to, I would say that's about 11 o'clock on the dial, work patterns and culture. So this is pre-COVID, by the way. So office-based, office hours, teams working together, probably doing the same things that we've always done. The bullet point there that talks about micromanagement, task culture, really focused on getting things done, high quality, time scales and everything, but essentially focused around the business as usual, really focused skills around that. Does that sound like you? Yeah, definitely. Have already started to change. Okay, that's nice. So people are starting to think about the opportunities that have already risen from COVID-19. So well done there. I think somebody just said we've already started to think about how we're going to change. Going up to 12 o'clock then, roles and responsibilities, owners of the technical experts in relation to procurement. We're the owners, we're the advisors, you do what we tell you to do, that kind of thing. That is our roles and responsibilities. Then moving on to 1 o'clock, relationship with stakeholders. This is an interesting one. What I'd like to point out here, and I can see people saying very close, until now, there has been no reason to change, this person says, but it looks like we're going to be changing now. Brilliant, that's great. That point at 1 o'clock where it says close working relationships with stakeholders. I think something that Professor Albert Sanchez mentioned this morning that chimed with me. He said that in some organizations, it looks as if procurement exists simply to ensure compliance with rules. And that is the kind of relationship sometimes, that's the second bullet point there, that relationships are just built on the need to discuss compliance and to discuss levels of compliance rather than going that extra mile and kind of being more strategic and kind of having that strategic link with our stakeholders. But that is something that we need to address. So we're looking at the before picture here. And of course, the last point there, probably about 5 o'clock, where it says vendor relationships, mainly transactional. The last session that with Jane and Alex, you were talking about strategic procurement and all of the frameworks. Clearly, I'm assuming that, if we are on those frameworks, we're less transactional and more strategic in our outlook. But this is a case study. And like I said, I went as far to the left as I could possibly go just to see what we mean in terms of moving the dial from where we were to where we want to be. Okay, so that is where we were pre-COVID-19. Let's go to the next slide then, Grace. Thanks a lot for your engagement there, guys. So where we are then. So clearly we are in a temporary working environment now. I can see a comment here, working from home and online when it's more efficient, but some of the duties in the teams have to be done on site. Okay, we'll come back to that later. But yes, at the moment, we are in a temporary working environment, temporary in terms of service delivery, temporary, I heard this morning where in the first session, we're talking about relaxation of some rules. I asked this question, I posed this question last time we met on the 15th of April, and I said, does any team have an equivalent of the stay home, protect the NHS, save lives mantra? And somebody came back to me with a stay engaged, protect operations, save cash, which I loved for his procurement function. I'm pretty sure some of you might also have some mantras there where you're focusing specifically on some critical success factors for this time. So clearly we put some temporary arrangements in place, as you can see, and my little Labrador there shows me that clearly it's not business as usual. Sometimes things drop out, sometimes, as that comment says from somebody from the last session, a lot of pressure continues to be put on us to deliver as normal, and at the moment it is not possible to be normal. Everything is changed. But let's kind of move away from that mindset. That's how we are at the moment. Let's move on, Grace, to the next slide. Okay, so in this slide, what I asked at the last session, I asked people how they were feeling, what kind of thoughts came up in terms of the new working environment and the new ways of working. And these are some of the things that you can see on your slide. And what I'd like to emphasize here is that not everything was negative. Of course, top right hand side, you can see, quite scared, a little bit anxious. On the other side, you can see energized, empowered, time for reflection, happy, focused, lonely, isolated, but surreal. That's a word that comes up quite a lot at the moment. But also, bottom right hand side, more productive, meetings more succinct, webinars more succinct. We have to keep to the focus, keep that focus going. So I don't know whether there's anyone who would just like to, are there any reflections on this slide that chime with you? People say at the moment they're feeling happy, focused, feeling good. Somebody's feeling all of the above, probably, any point of the day. So that's an interesting one. You might feel, focused in the morning and good to see the positives. Yes, and I was happy to see the positives as well. There is a lot in terms of what we can do, reflection, busier than ever, somebody says. I guess one point that you've made here is that it is good to kind of focus on the positives, but also to recognize the fact that this is not business as usual. Somebody there mentioned screen fatigue, and that's why that's one of the reasons why we've had these gaps between these webinars, because clearly you can't have one immediately after the other. You have to, people have in the past thought, okay, I can just transfer my physical meeting schedule into an online meeting schedule. Doesn't work, won't work. So people have to give themselves a little bit of time away from the screen. So thanks a lot. So there is a little bit, I know, about struggling with the separation between home and work. And we have to kind of focus a little bit, be a little bit disciplined around that. That is down to our own motivation and our own self-discipline. But from what I can see coming up in the chat, it feels as if these comments and these reflections are still valid and people are still struggling, but people are trying gradually to move onto the norm and take enough breaks and kind of give themselves a little bit of a framework for the current ways of working. Well done, guys. That's great. So next slide, please. This is another question that I posed at the last session. And there I said to people, I had taken an executive decision to take denial off the table. So nobody was allowed to select denial because, well, we can't. But you can see from this little change curve that we have here, about 49% of people were in the exploration stage. Somebody here says, love the use of all the technology, but hard to motivate the whole team to the same level of enthusiasm. So maybe some members of your team might not be at the exploration stage yet, might still be a little bit, to the other side, a little bit confused. What do we need to do as managers to kind of help them listen, questioning, raising awareness of what's possible? And lots of positive reinforcement at this time. But as you can see, lots of people getting into that, the other side, the right-hand side of the change curve around exploration, acceptance, and new confidence. And as I pose this question often and often enough, I'd like to see how people have gradually shifted during this time of lockdown from one side to the other. But that's just a nice little map to show you where people are at the moment. Moving to the left from the last webinar, that's an interesting one. Somebody has become less positive than they were. Oh, okay, thanks for the correction. He meant right. So gradually people are moving from the left-hand side to the more positive end, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Brilliant. It's nice to hear that. Okay, let's continue. Somebody mentioned about the traditional, something about the director and the traditional ways of working. I think we'll come to that a little bit later on. So I'll park that comment just for the time being. So this slide then, and this is kind of where I want to focus our attention a little bit this session, where we want to be. So where do we want to be when we get back after this lockdown has come to an end? And what I'd like to say here is that we do need to start thinking about it. It's very difficult at the moment to get that headspace because nobody knows the date, nobody knows the time. But planning means planning before something happens, not when it is happening. So where do we want to be when this lockdown comes to an end, when we all go back to work? What kind of opportunities have come up? And I recognized in the first session this morning, there was lots of talk around change. I think there was one comment, I was listening not just to the presentation itself, but to some of the questions that were coming up. And I think somebody said it's important that the profession is seen in a positive light and as a force for good going forwards. Sometimes, like I said in the case study, we're seen as the compliance police around procurement, but we want to be seen, and there's a point there about having empowered stakeholders. I think there was something that Professor Sanchez said this morning about, you know, in the future, having machine intelligence and big data and around compliance. So being able to kind of get the compliance done almost by automation, so that those conversations with our stakeholders are not just to do with, has this been ticked off, but more to do with, let's talk about the strategy and our objectives and added value discussions going forward. But just looking at this slide here, so this is me not being a procurement professional, thinking, where do we want to be in the future after COVID-19? How do we reap these opportunities? And these are the bullet points that I've come up with. Are there any other points that you as procurement professionals would want to add to this slide? So I've got here more outcome focused work, empowered stakeholders, procurement teams seen as proactive facilitators of change, strategic and commercial business partners. We've already mentioned digitization of the procurement pathway. Are there any other things that you would think, yes, there's an opportunity here? It might not be a once in a lifetime opportunity because we never know what the future holds, but it's definitely an opportunity to kind of think we can be different when we go back. Any comments here? Not just paper pushers. So what's this? We need to have, okay, well, I'll focus on the not just paper push, better work-life balance. Okay, that is one thing that's come up. But anything that you want in terms of your stakeholders' perceptions, any not a 9-to-5 work anymore, that's less rigid team makeup, getting in experts as needed. So focusing in on that, using the expertise that you have, improved risk management throughout the supply chains. What I'm seeing here is more of a, I like that one, more of a can-do approach, and refocusing the team, those that are comfortable with current processes. Okay, that you've touched on a change management issue. If you're comfortable with current processes, clearly there is some change management to be done to move people from where they were, to get out of their comfort zone to where we want them to be to deliver this. But driving strategy and change, somebody says, that is where we want to be as procurement professionals. And this is an opportunity for us to kind of think about that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's park that and move on to the next slide. Okay, now this slide, and there's a lot of text on it. I wanted to just demonstrate to you what we should be doing at this time, what we should be thinking about, either as team members or as team leaders around our change impact. So clearly, we were at a place, I showed you my little case study at the beginning, and there is where we want to get to. And in the middle of those two gaps, we need some clear actions, some clear deliverables that will help us to get from A to B. It doesn't just happen. Nothing in change management terms just happens, apart from, of course, COVID-19, which just came just like that. But what you have on your slide at the moment is a little bit of a framework that I tend to use whenever I'm involved in either any kind of process review within an organization. I go in and I say, okay, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And what is the gap? What is the change impact that we need to get us from A to B. So in this little slide, you have a low impact. I'll show you how this works. And some of you might have done things like this in your teams already, but low impact, medium impact, and high impact of change. So if I focus on leadership, for example, and I will touch on this specifically because I think there was something in the thread there on the chat around changing our directors' mindsets or around working, flexible working and so on. So if we want to go to a position where we are outcome focused rather than, sat at desk 9 to 5, focused on business as usual, task focused and so on, how do we think our leadership needs to change? Would that be a limited change to their behavior? As you can see across the top, I have the different parameters of change. So you've got behavior and culture, processes, location, technology, people in terms of training and so on, information and IT, safety and well-being, and compliance. So let's just travel across that grid just specifically for leadership. So how do you think our leaders need to change in terms of behavior and culture? Is that a limited change, as in L? Is that a medium change? Or would we say that that is really a fundamental change to our leadership within the procurement function? Can I have some responses on that? So we're thinking about leadership. So yeah, people would say that that's quite high. Yeah, in terms of, yeah, very high. So it would be a fundamental change to our leadership, that in terms of behavior. What about then, I think leaders have changed too throughout this. They have been working from home and juggling too. So I guess that means that they have a little bit of an understanding of what everyone is going through. Thanks for that comment there. Okay, let's move a little bit to the process then, just kind of working through our change impact assessment. So we have said that there will be a fundamental change in behavior and culture. What about in terms of process? Would be a little limited change to the process, maybe some minor changes to what they would do, or would that be fundamental? Would that be, how do you think people think about that? Medium, exactly. Yeah, okay, somebody thinks fundamental, that's fine. That might be for where your case study is at. But yes, so I think where my mind was at when I thought about this for leadership, I thought, yeah, either no real change to processes or maybe a little bit of low to medium, I thought on that. Great. And most people seem to be agreeing with me there. What about in terms of location? So for leadership going forwards, somebody has already said they are already juggling between working in a home environment versus working in an office environment. Do you think that that might change? Location no longer an issue, but somebody says fundamental, yes, because they might also change their ways of working, need to be flexible. So yes, so there might be something fundamental there. So that is the way. I'm not going to go through this because it's going to become repetitive in a virtual kind of environment that we're in at the moment. But what I just wanted to demonstrate is for each element of our work, as we are preparing for the future, we need to, and it might not be as detailed as this, but a little bit of a change impact assessment for each area. Contract monitoring, for example, you might want to take that through this grid as well. Procurement processes, you might pick a key one and then transfer, just look at it. Is it high, medium, or low in terms of how this is going to change to get to where you want to be? If I can go to the next slide, I'll show you one that I did. These are my thoughts in a darkened room. You might or might not agree with this, but this is what I would normally put together as a template for anything that I'm looking in relation to change impact assessment. So based on what we have just done, the little exercise that we did just now, I have a scenario here. So working arrangement temporarily as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, but clearly we want to reap those opportunities going back, and we want to focus here on the work patterns that I described in our initial case study. Okay, so at the top of that slide, you have where we were, which is what I showed you in the earlier case study, office space, which you all agreed kind of chimes with how you work at the moment, always done it this way, high levels of skills for business as usual, and so on. And we've also said where we need to be. And on the right-hand side of that slide, I have said, what does this mean for our people? So what are the benefits? First of all, there are lots of benefits to be had, but looking at all of those dimensions of change that I mentioned on the last slide, where do we think we're at? And for me, what I have said here is, well, if we're looking at work patterns and culture, I would say it's very high in terms of behavior and culture. You might agree with me on that. I'd like to see some either agreement or disagreement. We can't do a debate here, but I'd like to say whether we agree or not. Great. So in terms of processes, I have said there's a medium, because we're not going to fundamentally change our processes. We might have a few tweaks here and there. In terms of location, clearly I've said it's quite high, because we might be looking at a balance between home working and office working, especially during that transition period. I'll halt there for a minute, because I just want to reflect on something that somebody said at the last session, where I was talking about what are the issues when we're talking about going back to work. What are some of the things that you foresee? And one person said, people are still going to be scared. People are still, social distancing might still apply. If you currently have an office space where you had 10 people in 10 desks, as you transition back to work, you might want to have a little bit more flexibility, so that you have, half 50% of desks occupied, first couple of weeks back. Or you might want to make decisions like that about balancing home working, doing flexible 7 to 10 desk ratios and things like that. So that is going to be something that we're going to have to look at. So I've said, in terms of location, clearly quite high. We've looked at this as an organization and are starting to think about how teams can come back on a rota, somebody says here. That is exactly what I would expect. Staggered working from home is our approach within our team. So you're brilliant. People are already looking at things like this. So you're already doing the planning that's needed to kind of work our way through the transition. In terms of technology, working pattern and culture, I have said that's kind of medium, because I'm not assuming, at least in the short term, that you're going to have fundamental changes in your technology. But, there will be some, like we're all getting used to Zoom and other platforms for all of this collaborative working. So I've said a medium kind of approach there, already looking at this home screening, rota work, yet the same point that we've just been making. Brilliant. Thank you. So so in terms of technology, do you all agree that for, at least for the medium to short term, that's a medium change impact? Yeah, probably more reliance on cloud solutions. Okay, yes, I hear that. So yes, so we all agree cloud solutions obviously better for a remote working environment, so that you're not relying on VPN and all of that kind of access. But in terms of the technology, I've said medium. In terms of the people, I've also said medium, because there might be some training needs, but I don't think that we're going to all fundamentally go back and start restructuring everywhere, for example. And the only other area that I've ranked as high is around safety and well-being. When you talk about working from home and that kind of culture, I think it is imperative for managers. I think I've written there, managers, HR, change teams, to be very clear that the welfare of your staff is going to be heightened, probably because you're responsible for their working environment. So yes, so there's a lot going on. So I was just reading something there to see whether it was relevant to this point. So clearly you can see that there is a wealth of information here when you conduct a change impact assessment. And what you would then do, clearly I'm not going to go through the whole pathway here today, but from your change impact assessment, you would pull together an action plan. And you would focus that action plan specifically around the highs to start off with. So clearly there are things we need to address for business and culture, location, and safety and well-being here. And then you would prioritize the next areas, which are the mediums, so any kind of process changes, the technology, and so on. And you would put that into an action plan going forward. And it sounds to me like people are already starting to think along those lines and put those action plans together. In the last session that we ran, I said, you know, when we go back to work, let's not immediately jump into business as usual. Let us take a little bit of time to reflect, and conducting a change impact assessment on your core areas of responsibility, I think, is a great way to take that time to reflect. So an exercise like this in a little bit of a team environment on your first couple of days back, I think would be a useful exercise. It's not business as usual, it will be different. Exactly. We are kind of moving to a new normal. But is this, I'm going to just ask the question, pose the question, are you thinking of doing something similar to this as you kind of go back to work, just reflecting on where you were, where you want to be, what the change impact is, and then putting an action plan together to achieve that? Yes. Okay. Great. So it's good. We've already started. I wasn't, but I will now. Oh, thank you. My work is done. Okay. Next slide, please, Grace. Okay. So here, I'd like to just touch on a few things, just building on a change impact assessment. And what I want to focus on here is, how will we know? This is also a question that was posed at the last session. You know, there's a lot of unknowns in the future at the moment, but how will we know that our leaders are ready, that our teams are ready? And that is a really difficult question to answer. But what I've done here, first click please, Grace, is just try and put some thoughts together based on a regular business readiness criteria that I would always use whenever I go in and do a change management project. Before I say, yeah, let's click the button and say we're ready to go, these are some of the things that I ask our clients to reflect on. So if, for example, everything here applies, the technology that you currently have can't be scaled up, so we're all working from home at the moment. Somebody mentioned cloud-based just now, so the more services we have on the cloud, clearly the more prepared we are. But if everything is still reliant on VPN and everyone's still having to go into the office because they can't get that sheet of paper or things are manual, then clearly we are not ready for the new normal that is going to come after COVID-19. People, if there are still high levels of anxiety, skills and attitudes and knowledge not consistent, then clearly we're still in the red in relation to business readiness. If we haven't clearly defined how our processes, I know I said there might be limited change to our processes, but there might still be a few tweaks that we're making. If they haven't been properly defined, then clearly we're still in the red. And the infrastructure, like I said, the office environment, is it fit for purpose for contingent social distancing that will still apply after we go back? So that is the red. I'm hoping that from the discussion that we've been having, some of us are kind of already out of the red. I don't know why I said ready there. Okay, click, Grace, 2 clicks for me so I can do amber and green together. Thank you. So if we're out of the red and we're in the amber, clearly we've already started thinking about some activities where we can clearly see that the technology is fit for purpose. People are highly skilled and know exactly how they are going to operate in this new world. We have defined the processes, at least in some areas. So we might have done a little bit of prioritization and said, you know, this is where we need to get to after week 1. So that all needs to be ready and waiting. So that is amber. And of course, green, all areas of activity are now fit for purpose for the new world. I'm just going to pause here while I ask you to reflect and tell me where you think you are in terms of business readiness. I'm not going to pause for too long because, like I said, in the virtual world, a minute sounds, you know, seems like forever. But read that slide and kind of tell me where you think you are as an organization, as a team, in terms of business readiness to get back to a new normal. Amber. Okay, so lots of ambers. One person is ready, so green. Okay. I think the lion's share mostly around the physical working. Okay, brilliant. So at least we're moving out. Okay, Okay, now moving into amber. Yeah, so I'm hearing that. So somebody said we're in the red, but I'm moving into, and somebody has already said they're green. Brilliant. That's well. So we're moving in the right direction. So we've started that planning, we've started the thinking, and we're kind of getting in amber, preparing for green. Thank you, everyone. So clearly, we've all started thinking about business readiness and getting back to a new normal. I keep on saying a new normal. And somebody has already said it in the chat, but this is not going back to business as it was. This is taking the opportunity to change and move. And I think I read something quite recently that only about 9% of the UK in a recent survey, well, it was online, I saw this, want to go back to normal as it was before. Everybody is looking at a new normal and taking the opportunity, seeing silver linings everywhere. I'll talk more about silver linings in a follow-up slide to this. But yeah, so it's really great that we're all on that journey and we're all embracing a new normal and moving to green. Thank you very much for that. Next slide, please, Grace. And a click. So here we're at the traffic lights, red, amber, green, and now we're kind of moving into a new normal, a new business as usual. And here are some of the bullet points that I would expect us to have when we are there. And when I say there, it doesn't mean that there is no more room for continuous improvement, but at least we have reached another steady state. So new ways of working, fully embedded. I don't expect anyone to answer this because we will not be there until we are there. So, you know, this is just a point to kind of start ticking off as things get back and we can finally say, now this is where we are now. This is steady state. Everything is fully embedded. So this is kind of where I would look for us to be going in terms of preparing for our transition and our getting back to a new normal. Let's go to the next slide. So here then, a little bit of a recap. What have I been saying at this time? And just going through those bullet points, the first one there, building on the opportunities arising from the current ways of working that we've been all involved in during this COVID-19 lockdown. And it's really refreshing to see that we are all moving in that general direction, as we saw from the change curve and as I can see from your comments here. One thing that I did want to highlight today, if you haven't already read it, there's a really lovely document on I would say it's lovely, it was written by it was written by our lead in business development. But Joel Arber has written a little paper talking about silver linings, opportunities to transform the sector as a result of COVID-19. It's on our website. I think it's really worth a read because it kind of talks about how we can develop based on where we find ourselves here and the opportunities. So just something to look at there. The crisis, somebody says, has forced us to address business readiness in a compressed timeline, which can have positive results. Yes, we have had to. We've had to stop having those long committees and taking 6 months to do things. I think somebody said to me at another of these sessions, we've gone through 18 months of change within a few weeks, is something that has been said. So yes, please read that paper. The second bullet point there then, we need to return to some sense of normality while adopting all of these new good behaviors that we have started to take on during this crisis. You know, more engagement, more focusing on critical success factors. There's a point here, another question that came up at the last session when I said, you know, what kind of issues are we going to see going back? And somebody said, oh, there will be lots of things that are going to be waiting on the plate that you haven't done during this lockdown. And I looked at that question and I thought to myself, that is true. I mean, I wouldn't say that, you know, everything we haven't done doesn't need to be done, but also what I would say is we should probably reflect on, does it need to be done? So we need to start challenging things a little bit to say, you know, prioritize what needs to be done going forward. Somebody said, agree, we're being forced to be more agile, somebody says. A new normal. Yep, so everybody is focusing on a new normal. A quote from JFK: in a crisis, be aware of the danger, but recognize the opportunity. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I didn't know that quote from JFK. I do now. Okay, so lots going on here in the chat. Thank you very much for all of those comments. I think I'm going to write a paper on change management based on all the comments that are coming through. So we are planning for a new normal. That last point there, I'd really want us to focus on it. Maintain some sense of urgency. The worst thing that can happen is going back and then relaxing back into our comfort zones pre-COVID-19. That will mean that the last couple of months have really totally been a waste, and we really don't want that. We need to maintain some sense of urgency going forward, some sense of doing things differently. And there's a question that I'd like to pose for you, just coming to the end of this session here. I really would like to hear from the conference. You've had 2 days of this now. You've got the 15th and you've got today. Just any comments that would kind of lighten my heart, just to show me what kind of plans do you have to maintain that sense of urgency going forward, to plan for the new normal, either as an individual or in your working environment, or as a team leader, manager, head of procurement. If I can just have a few things in the chat to say, what are some of just one thing that you are planning to do? I mean, I'm a change manager, but I wouldn't be one worth my salt if I didn't pose that question. Collaboration with the team. That's a good one. Financial crisis will push procurement to the top of the agenda. Our time has come. That's somebody really going through that, yeah, I have a dream kind of thing. Brilliant. Being more innovative. Yeah, that's continuous engagement. People welfare, ask about people's welfare and mental health. Refresh the ambitions of the team. I love that one. Refreshing your ambition. This is a time to have new ambitions, quicker turnaround, so people are already kind of focusing on some key objectives going forward. If we do not have a cure, then it is likely that we'll face this again in the autumn. Therefore, okay, yep, I hear that. So we need to be ready just in case this reoccurs, somebody says. Well, yeah, I kind of agree, but touch wood. Remember the person, not the job. Remember the person, not the job. That's a really nice sentiment there. Thinking outside the box when it comes to solving logistical problems. So there are lots of things there that people are already prepped and people are already thinking about. So brilliant. Maintain that sense of urgency after this COVID-19 has passed. Last slide then, Grace. Now, those of you who have heard from me before, this is a slide I always fall back on whenever I'm talking about change and sustaining change going forward. The rules of sustainable change, if you do nothing else, these are there's about 5 points here. These are really important in terms of sustaining change going forward. So that clear commitment from our leadership. And as procurement leads, as procurement professionals, we need to start thinking about how we get that agenda on the table. I think I read a comment earlier where somebody said, our time has come. Well, our time has definitely come, but we need to demonstrate the evidence for that. We need to kind of put information right before our senior leadership, get advocates from within the sector, speak to our stakeholders, get them on board. Let them understand what's in it for them and what's in it for the organization in terms of getting a much better environment for procurement. And just coming back to the question that I said, somebody said earlier, I've got it on a post-it note here. It says, it's important that the profession is seen in a positive light and as a force for good for the future. So that is me done for this slide. I think I've kind of slightly overstepped here, so I hope I still have some time for questions, but Marion is going to help me in terms of going through the questions. What do we have, Marion?
You do indeed, yes. Thank you so much, Fola. That was fabulous. We have a few questions in the chat, so I just say to anybody, there's time if you want to get your questions in there. Feel free to submit them now. But I do have quite a few noted down myself for you, Fola. So let's start with something generic though that came from the audience, a broad question. How will we know when change has been achieved? As you say, we're kind of in the process of it. We're in it. We can't maybe get perspective on it. So how do we know when we will have achieved the change we need?
So okay, let's go back to, and sorry, this is a bit naff, but the driving a car analogy. Okay, so your first lesson, you probably couldn't even get off the pavement, or you hit the pavement when you tried to turn. But now we've got to that point of unconscious competence in what we do. When we get to that point where it's like second nature, you wake me up in the morning, that's what I do, that's what I think in terms of behavior, all of that mindset, that is when we will know that we have got to that point of having achieved the change. Before that, when we're still thinking about it, we're still on the upward trajectory. So all I would say here is, the more you keep doing something, I think, what is it that say you need to do something about 20 times for it to become, second nature and routine. Just keep on. You might have to force yourself in the first couple of weeks, but there will come a time when you'll wake up, you'll go to work, or you're downstairs in your kitchen or wherever the new normal is, and things will become second nature. So that's in terms of that generic question, that's the response that I would give to that.
Fabulous, thanks. A more specific question about how we might return to a new normal. If we're looking at social distancing when we go back to our campuses and our offices, how might that work in terms of use of the estate? So do you think it's likely that we're going to have people working in lecture theaters separated, or how do you think people will manage a balance there in terms of getting back to in-person but maintaining safety?
Yeah, this is a really important question, I think, as we plan for that change impact going back. I mean, when I was thinking about just putting that change impact together, as I was putting these slides together, I was thinking specifically about the location point and what we need to do. So like I said in the actual presentation, if you have an office currently where you have 10 desks, you probably do not want to go back with 10 people filling those desks. So we will have to probably use meeting rooms, or we might think about going a little bit further, and somebody has already said it in the chat, about having this a little bit of a rota, about coming in at different times. So we have a rota for working from home versus the office. Now, the disbenefits of that is that it will be a long time before you then get your team all together. So that is something that we need to look at the balance. But from what I would be saying is, we need to be thinking about where we can have either large meeting rooms that we will configure as office space just for a short period of time, as we get back to something that resembles the real change at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, we need to speak to our estates people about that, definitely.
Absolutely. I sense that's how we use university estates overall is going to change quite considerably if students aren't back at campus in September. Something I think that came up a fair bit in the chat was, the members of a team may be at different points on that curve, and maybe, I suppose, moving forward but regressing slightly in steps depending on what's going on. Just wondering what your advice might be. How can we as individuals promote and support positive change amongst teams where people might be at different places and not everybody is as enthusiastic about change?
Yeah, and this is where, and sorry for doing a plug here for my colleague Felicity from the last session, but this is where coaching and mentoring comes into play, because we will, like we've already shown, people will be at different points on the curve. So if somebody is really totally at full confidence, full commitment, use them as champions of the change. Help them to, normally we don't, if we have, in change management, you always look for champions and advocates of the change anyway. But if somebody is already, raring to go, recognize that by making them mentors or buddying people up so that they can, you know, share their enthusiasm. That's one way of doing it. But coaching, like I said, is a really key point here. And I think all leaders and team members need to kind of focus a little bit more on the benefits of coaching during this time. Those listening, those reflecting feelings, those not expecting everybody to be at the same point along the change curve. So there's a statement I always use about meeting people at the point of their need. You know, there's no point, you know, cuddling somebody up if they're all raring to go. But if they are at that point where they still need that support, don't expect everybody to be in one direction, is essentially what I'm saying there.
Absolutely perfect. And I'm just going to pull in a question that's relevant to this, I think. In terms of supply chains and working with our suppliers who may be at different points within this curve as well, what do you think we can do to help our contractors navigate through this?
So yeah, that's an interesting one. So in terms of our stakeholders, so this is specifically around the suppliers, isn't it? Yeah. So all organizations, the good thing, I guess, if you can see a good thing here, the good thing about this is everybody, all organizations have gone through this together. Okay, might have had different impacts, but so when we are speaking to, and I'll generalize this, not just suppliers, but stakeholders in general, we're speaking from a point of empathy rather than a point of not understanding. So there are different mechanisms. I think one of the points I mentioned in the case study is treating all of our vendors and all of our suppliers the same. You know, that kind of transactional approach. Well, we need to get beyond that and see them as partners. If we're working with people as partners, then we're looking not both at our needs, not just at our needs rather, but at theirs as well. So recognizing that we involve them in any kind of objectives arising after COVID-19, having that kind of partnership arrangement where it's not just a tell, but a speak to each other, engage, and come up with something that works for both the stakeholders, not the suppliers, the stakeholders, and ourselves.
Fab, thanks very much, Fola. And an interesting question, and there might be some suggestions within the audience on this for the chat, but somebody's wondering, other than online quizzes and sort of socially distant drinks nights and things like that, what other activities can teams do or get involved in?
Okay, what's the chat here? Is anyone saying anything here? I'd love to hear from you. I guess this is interesting because reflecting on this and how we have tried to take our physical environment into online environment, you have different personality types. Everybody knows that. So sometimes the drinks nights and the quizzes might not actually work for people who are a little bit more of an introvert. You know, they might work for, so we need to kind of think about both the larger events, but also the much smaller one-to-ones as well. So normally if we were in an office environment, for example, you might go by somebody's desk and have a chat. Well, you know, why don't we, you know, occasionally in Microsoft Teams, just dial somebody without, you know, without having a meeting planned in the diary. If you see they're online, just have a by the desk chat. So I think there is a lot we can do in terms of set pieces, but there's also a lot we can do in terms of just keeping that office informality going as well. Picking up the phone rather than sending an email, I think works. And Grace, I have to give Grace a plug. She's really good at this. You know, if you know have an email chain going, well, you know, she'll give you a little nudge on Microsoft Teams, and you'll have a chat. So don't let's lose that kind of informality of some of the engagement is kind of what I'd say there. I know I've ducked the question in terms of anything innovative, but I just wanted to plug that little way of working as well.
We'll brainstorm that. If any of us come up with anything kind of groundbreaking, we'll let the delegates know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, there's a comment in the chat about really missing social interaction.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that people, again, are probably on a spectrum in terms of wanting more interaction. And there may be other people at the other end who feel sort of bombarded by things binging at them and buzzing at them. And, you know, I guess one of the challenges with Teams now is somebody can't always tell if you're already occupied. So you may get three people calling you at the same time.
True.
Yeah. So
It's interesting. An online environment, and this is a point that has been made by the change managers, an online environment will never fully replace a physical working environment. However, we can get a blended approach, a balance of both. So the best of online and the best of a physical environment. I think that's
absolutely.
aiming.
And I want to come to a really interesting question about the fact that many organizations are now being more efficient and effective due to this kind of changed mindset around, okay, there's urgency, we may need to put in more hours, we may need to work in ways that we haven't. And this individual is wondering if actually these are unsustainable ways of working. And when we go back to the new normal, will management have a expectation that we can continue to operate at this pace when it really has been quite frenetic for some people?
Yeah, this is the point that we would, when we started that change impact, and the reason why I chose leadership to start going through it is I think our leaders will, but there needs to be a change in mindset, definitely, in terms of what the art of the possible for the future. And the art of the possible means embracing that more flexible working environment, embracing that results only kind of approach, and not the micromanagement that we highlighted in the case study. So, but what I would say about that is, for us to get there and for our leaders to get there, they need evidence of what works and what doesn't work. So this is where, that being very clear about what needs to change to ensure that maximum productivity, being clear about what has really worked during this time that enabled 150% rather than 100%, and also the negative, what didn't work because I was only able to work at 10% when I would have worked at so on. So having a very clear narrative always works, and if you present that in your one-to-ones and in your leadership teams, I think that is a way to kind of get people to focus on the change to the normal that we're going to have after we get back.
Absolutely, and an element of this question from our delegate today is too around cost efficiencies. Universities are obviously going to be really under the cosh and needing to make efficiencies more than ever before. It was already a really important issue.
Yeah.
So if managers and teams in universities are considering efficiencies within their organizations, is that going to put unrealistic expectations on the people left behind to carry out that work?
Yeah, it's one of those questions that's, hey, yes, there are lots of challenges there. In fact, I've seen somebody in the chat that's already said, I am not alone in the challenges. So yes, there is a lot going on here. But no, sorry to be flippant there, but yes, there are lots of challenges going forwards, especially in relation to efficiencies, especially in relation to, income generation and all of that. I think I was looking at, with my change network that we have in SUMS, I was just going through some of their priorities in terms of some of the projects that change leaders are being pulled into at the moment. And it's all about reducing costs, increasing income. Those are the top projects that everybody is kind of thinking about. What do we need to do now? And then, interestingly enough, the third on the priority list is around staff and students' well-being. But the first two are those reducing costs and increasing income for all kind of strategic plans that are being developed as we speak at the moment.
Absolutely. And I guess now is why it's more important than ever to be kind of putting time and energy and thought to that. So I know SUMS Consulting is really well placed in terms of having insight from universities across the sector to understand, how universities are adapting, what they may need to do, and then, kind of thinking about how we can help them with their models. So Fola, just to ask a last question before we wrap up for the day, if people are interested in making changes within their teams, is that something that you're available to help institutions with if they want to look at a change program within their team now after going through 6 weeks
I
of this?
would, yeah. I said I was just speaking on top of you there. I would love to. That's my bread and butter. In fact, yes, my to do after this lockdown ends is to go to any university that will have me to go and do some work with them on change management. Because yes, it's really lovely working in this kind of way, working from home, working in different universities and working at Reading. But now I think it's all been, your environment is so much smaller. So yes, if there's anyone out there who needs that support, I'm willing.
Perfect. We'll put your contact details in the email to go out to delegates. So, Fola, thank you so much again. That was an excellent session, a wonderful way to end the day and our 2 days of conference programming. Audience, thank you so much. Your engagement was wonderful. We couldn't do this kind of thing without your level of support and engagement in the session.